There is a law that governs everything in this story. To gain something, you must lose something of equal value. No exceptions, shortcuts, amount of love or intelligence or desperation bends it. Two brothers tested that law on a winter night in a small town called Resembool, and what it cost them set in motion a chain of events stretching back 400 years. To a dead kingdom in the middle of a desert, to a creature born from a single drop of blood in a glass bottle, to a trap built across an entire country so slowly and so carefully that the people living inside it never saw the walls. This is the complete story, all 64 episodes. Every sacrifice, every revelation, every quiet moment before the storm, and every storm that followed. Find a comfortable position. There is nothing left to do tonight except listen. Welcome to Anna Brain. This is Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, from the very beginning. Part 1. The Transmutation Plus. There is a small town at the edge of nowhere called Resembool. Green hills roll out in every direction. A river cuts through the middle of it. The houses are spaced far enough apart that neighbors give each other room, but close enough that everybody knows everybody. It is the kind of place where children grow up knowing the names of the dogs on every street, where the same families have lived for generations, where the sky at night is so dark and clear that the stars feel close enough to touch. Edward Elric was born here in 1899. His brother Alphonse arrived a year later. Their father, a tall blonde man named Van Hohenheim, was often somewhere else, traveling, researching, absent in the way that certain people are absent even when they are physically present. And then one day, Hohenheim left Resembool entirely and did not come back. The boys were very young when this happened. Young enough that the absence of their father became simply a fact of their lives, something they grew around rather than through. Their mother, Tricia, stayed. She raised them alone in their house on the hill. She was warm and steady and the center of everything the brothers understood about home. Edward, the older one, was loud and sharp and constantly moving, constantly thinking. Alphonse, the younger, was gentler, softer in the way he spoke, more patient, the kind of child who would stop to pick up an injured bird on the road and carry it home. They were different boys in almost every way, and they were inseparable. They had a gift, both of them. Alchemy is the science at the heart of this world. The basic principle is this: understand the structure of something well enough, draw the right circle, channel the right energy, and you can take that thing apart and put it back together as something else. Soil becomes stone, stone becomes dust, broken metal becomes a working blade. The world is made of matter, and matter can be rearranged, but only within strict limits. The iron rule that governs all of it is called equivalent exchange. You cannot get more than you give. The value of what you create must match the value of what you use. Always, without exception. Edward and Alphonse took to alchemy the way certain children take to music. By the time Edward was 10 years old, he could perform basic transmutations without a circle, which is almost unheard of. Alphonse was quieter about his abilities but no less gifted. Their neighbor, Pinocchio Rockbell, a small, sharp-eyed old woman who repaired mechanical limbs for a living, watched them practice in the fields and recognized that these two boys were something unusual. And then Tricia got sick. The illness came the way hard things often come, slowly at first, then all at once. She grew pale, she grew thin. The warmth that had always seemed to radiate from her dimmed, week by week, through that long autumn. Edward sat with her every evening. Alphonse brought her water and talked to her about nothing in particular, the way children talk to sick parents when they are trying to pretend everything is fine. By the time winter arrived, she was gone. Edward was 10, Alphonse was 9. Grief in children does not always look like grief. Sometimes it looks like fury. Sometimes it looks like a plan. The brothers had already heard of a woman named Izumi Curtis, an alchemist of considerable ability who lived in a city called Dublith and who occasionally took on students. They traveled there and asked to be trained. Izumi looked at these two small, serious boys who had just lost their mother, and she agreed, on one condition. She took them to a small island in the middle of a lake. She left them there for a month with nothing. No food provided, no shelter built for them, just the elements, the island, and an instruction: think. What she was teaching them, through that month of cold and hunger and rain, was something she called the flow of the world. Everything in nature gives and takes in equal measure. The rain falls, the river rises, the river feeds the ground feeds the plants feed the animals die and feed the ground again. Nothing is wasted, nothing comes from nowhere. The entire world is one enormous cycle of exchange. When she brought them back, she began teaching them alchemy properly. They were extraordinary students. She could see it. She could also see something else, a desperation in both of them that worried her. They were not learning alchemy the way a curious child learns it. They were learning it with a specific destination in mind. They went home. They spent months buried in books. Edward tracked down medical texts and memorized the precise chemical contents of a human body. Every element, every compound, every proportion. He was 11 by this point. This is not a normal thing for an 11-year-old to be doing, and part of him knew that, but he had decided. They had both decided. They were going to bring their mother back. Human transmutation, the attempt to create or restore a human life through alchemy, is the one thing every alchemist in the world agrees you must never do. Every text says it. Every teacher says it. The prohibition is not a preference or a suggestion. It is a hard wall. And the reason for that wall, as Edward and Alphonse were about to learn, is that the law of equivalent exchange does not become flexible when the thing you want is a human being. A human life has a value that cannot be matched by anything two children could gather from books and fields and their own devotion. They did it anyway. They drew the circle on the floor of their mother's house on the hill. They gathered everything the formula required. They knelt at the edges of the array together, two small boys in the dark, and they pushed everything they had, all their knowledge, all their energy, all their love and grief and desperate hope, into the transmutation. The circle activated. And then, something went wrong. What happens to an alchemist who attempts human transmutation is not simple failure. The gate opens. Every person who has crossed this line describes it differently, but the experience is always the same in its essential shape. One moment you are kneeling on the floor of a room you know. The next moment the room is gone, and you are somewhere vast and white and absolute. And there is a presence there that wears your face, a blank, featureless version of your own reflection, which looks at you with something that is not quite curiosity and not quite contempt. This presence is called the truth. It shows you things, the nature of alchemy, the structure of existence, secrets that human beings are not built to hold, and then it takes something from you in exchange for the attempt. What Edward saw at the gate shattered something in him. He glimpsed the full structure of the universe. Every truth of alchemy laid bare at once, more knowledge than a mind should be able to hold. And then, the truth took his left leg. He came back to the circle, screaming. Alphonse was gone. His brother, 9 years old, who had been kneeling right beside him, had been pulled through entirely. The gate had taken his body as the price of the attempt. What remained in the circle was nothing at all. Edward had only seconds. He was bleeding from the stump where his leg had been, in shock, in agony. And he made a decision in those seconds that defined everything that followed. He looked at the suit of armor standing in the corner of the room. He bit his own hand and used his blood to draw a new transmutation circle on the floor. No time for anything else. And he performed a second transmutation on the spot, without preparation, without a formal array. He bound his brother's soul to the armor. He fused Alphonse's living consciousness to the hollow iron shell. The price for that second transmutation was his right arm. The armor's eyes lit up red. Alphonse's voice came out of it, confused, afraid, asking what had happened, asking where he was. Edward had given his arm and his leg and had produced a thing that was not their mother. The result of the original transmutation, the thing that had come out of the circle, was something Edward described later only as wrong. It had looked like Trisha on the surface, or close to it. It had not been her. It had suffered for the short time it existed, and then it stopped. Pinocchio Rockbell found them that night. She and her granddaughter Winry, a girl the same age as Edward, who had grown up alongside the Elric brothers in Rezembool, took them in. Edward lost consciousness from blood loss and spent weeks in recovery. Winry, who had grown up watching her father work with mechanical limbs, began studying automail engineering with a new and urgent focus. Automail is a specific kind of mechanical prosthetic that is wired directly into the nervous system, painful to install and months of recovery to use properly, but functional in a way that a simple wooden peg is not. When Edward was well enough to move, he made a decision about the house. He and Alphonse walked back to it together, a large iron suit of armor and a small boy on one flesh leg and one metal one, and they set it on fire. They stood in the field and watched it burn. The purpose of burning it was to make a promise to themselves. There was no going back. There was no version of things where they came home and resumed their lives as though none of this had happened. Forward was the only direction. Alphonse in his armor body could not eat, could not sleep, could not feel the temperature of the air or the texture of the ground beneath his feet. He was a child's mind in a hollow shell, and he would remain that way until they found a solution. Edward had 2 mechanical limbs and a mind sharpened by everything the gate had shown him, and he would remain that way until they found a solution. The solution, they believed, was the Philosopher's Stone. Every text on advanced alchemy eventually mentions the stone. It is described as an object, sometimes red, sometimes described as a jewel or a liquid or a powder, that amplifies alchemical ability beyond the normal limits of equivalent exchange. With a Philosopher's Stone, the theory went, a person could do things that should be impossible, could circumvent the law, could perhaps restore what had been lost. Edward enrolled in the state alchemist examination run by the military of Amestris. He was 12 years old. He passed. He became, on the day of his certification, the youngest state alchemist in the history of the program. The military gave him a pocket watch, the symbol of his status, and the title of Fullmetal Alchemist, a name that referred to his mechanical limbs. He and Alphonse left Rezembul. They began searching. What they did not know yet, what the story has not yet told them, is that the Philosopher's Stone they are looking for is not what the books describe. The truth of what the stone actually is, how it is made, what it costs, is so much darker than anything Edward had read in any text. And there is someone, something, that has known this truth for 400 years. Something that has been waiting, quietly and patiently, for exactly this kind of search to begin. That story starts in a city called Lior, with a false prophet and a stone that does not work the way it should. And it ends somewhere neither brother can imagine yet. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. In the next part of the story, the brothers arrive in a desert city where a priest is performing miracles, and the first crack appears in the idea that a Philosopher's Stone is the answer to anything at all. Part 2. The State Alchemist and the Sowing Life Man. The first city the brothers investigate is called Lior. It sits at the eastern edge of Amestris, where the country starts to give way to desert. The buildings are pale stone. The streets are narrow and dusty. The people who live there are devoted followers of a religion built around a god called Leto, and their spiritual leader is a man named Father Cornello, a priest who has been performing what everyone in the city calls miracles. Cornello stands before crowds and produces things from nothing. He restores broken objects. He makes plants grow out of dry ground. He brings dead birds back to life. His followers watch these acts with the kind of total belief that only comes when a person is desperate to believe in something, and they give him everything: their devotion, their obedience, their willingness to do whatever he asks. Edward watches one of these demonstrations from the crowd and feels something sharpen in him almost immediately. The miracles are real. The transmutations are genuinely happening. But something about them is wrong. Not morally wrong, not yet, but technically wrong. The law of equivalent exchange is not being followed. Cornello is producing more than he should be able to produce from the materials available. A dead bird should require a living thing of equal value to restore. Dry sand should not be able to produce a blooming flower. And yet these things are happening, and the circle Cornello wears on his ring is doing it. Edward understands what this means before the crowd has finished applauding. Cornello has a Philosopher's Stone. The brothers get close to him. They get caught. What follows is a confrontation that strips away everything comfortable about Cornello's operation. Edward fights through Cornello's followers, exposes the transmutations for what they are, forces Cornello to admit on a radio broadcast that the miracles were performed through the stone and not through any divine power. The city hears it. The spell breaks. And when it breaks, Cornello's usefulness to the people who gave him the stone in the first place is over. He is killed. Not by Edward, not by anyone in Lior, by a figure who has been watching from the shadows. A shapeshifter, something that can wear any face, any voice, any body. This creature disposes of Cornello without sentiment and disappears. Edward and Alphonse do not understand what they have seen yet. They file it away. But the important thing, the thing that matters for the rest of the story, is what Edward learns about the stone itself. The one Cornello had was not stable. It was deteriorating. It could not do everything a true Philosopher's Stone is supposed to be able to do. And what Edward discovers, even from this incomplete and crumbling example, is a question he cannot answer yet. What exactly is a Philosopher's Stone made of? Every text describes what it can do. No text explains what it actually is, what goes into creating one, what the cost of making it might be. He files that question away too. They move on to Central City. Central is the capital of Amestris and the home of the military that runs the country. Amestris is not a democracy. It is a state controlled entirely by its armed forces, with a ruler called the Führer at the top. And at the time the brothers arrive, that Führer is a man named King Bradley. Bradley is a compact, precise man with a scar over one eye, and the kind of stillness that powerful people sometimes have. The stillness of someone who has never needed to raise his voice to get what he wants. The military system that Edward has joined as a state alchemist is enormous and layered. There are generals and colonels and lieutenants and privates, all arranged in a strict order of rank. State alchemists sit in a specific position within this system. They are given funding and resources to continue their research, and in exchange, the military can call on them as what certain officers bluntly describe as human weapons. Edward accepted this arrangement because it gives him access to classified research on the Philosopher's Stone. He understood, going in, what the deal was. The officer assigned to oversee the Elric brothers is a colonel named Roy Mustang. Mustang is the kind of person who seems effortless and a little arrogant on the surface, and is working twice as hard as anyone around him underneath that surface. He uses fire as his alchemic specialty. His gloves are woven with a specific pattern that allows him to create a spark, and from that spark he can produce and direct flame with extraordinary precision. He is ambitious in a specific way. He wants to become Führer, not because he wants power for its own sake, but because he has a plan for what he would do with it if he had it. The full shape of that plan takes most of the story to emerge. His closest companion is his lieutenant, Riza Hawkeye. She is a sniper, precise and calm, and she watches Mustang with a kind of steady attention that goes beyond professional loyalty. She has known him for a long time. There are things in their shared history that neither of them talks about, not yet. Mustang is the one who introduces Edward and Alphonse to the man at the center of Part 2. His name is Sho Tucker, and he is known as the Sowing Life Alchemist. Tucker earned his state alchemist certification 2 years before the brothers arrive. He earned it through a single remarkable achievement. He created a chimera, a being formed by fusing 2 different creatures together into one body that could speak human words. A speaking chimera had never been produced before. The certification board was stunned. Tucker was given his license, his funding, his house in East City, and his status. He lives in that house with his young daughter Nina and their large white dog, Alexander. Nina is 4 years old. She has brown hair and bright eyes and the easy fearlessness of a very small child who has never had a reason to be afraid of anything. She loves her father completely. She loves Alexander with the specific intensity that children reserve for their dogs. When Edward and Alphonse arrive at the Tucker house to research Tucker's library on chimera alchemy, Nina immediately absorbs them into her world, pulling Alphonse by the hand into the garden, climbing on his armor as though a 7-foot iron suit is the most natural climbing structure in the world, demanding that Edward play with her and Alexander before he is allowed to look at any books. Edward, who is not naturally warm with children, plays with her anyway. So does Alphonse. They spend several days at the Tucker house. They go through the library during the day and eat meals with Tucker in the evenings. Tucker is distracted and worried. His annual assessment is coming up, the evaluation where state alchemists must present new research to justify their continued funding. Tucker tells Edward plainly that his research over the past 2 years has not produced anything impressive. If the assessment goes badly, he will lose his license. He will lose the house. He will lose the funding that keeps him working. He is frightened in the way that people are frightened when the thing they are afraid of is very specific and very close. Nina tries to comfort him. She tells him not to worry. She tells him that she and Alexander will growl at anyone who tries to take his title away. She means it as a joke, the way small children make jokes, without understanding that the people they are trying to cheer up are sometimes beyond the reach of cheerful things. Tucker hears those words differently. The brothers leave one afternoon and return the next morning to a house that feels wrong from the moment they walk through the door. Something about the quality of the silence. Something about the absence of Nina's voice, which had filled every corner of the house every other day they had been there. Tucker brings them into his study. He shows them his new research. There is a chimera in the room, large, dark-furred, crouched in the corner. Tucker presents it with the careful pride of a man showing off something he has been working toward for a long time. The chimera can speak. It says Edward's name. It says the word brother. Its voice is low and sad and strange. Edward stares at the chimera for a long moment. He asks Tucker 2 questions. He asks when Tucker received his state alchemist certification. 2 years ago, Tucker says. He asks when Tucker's wife left the family. Tucker looks at the floor. 2 years ago, he says. Edward asks a 3rd question. He asks where Nina and Alexander are. Tucker says that he catches on quickly. He says it with a faint smile. The smile of a man who has already decided everything and no longer cares very much what happens next. The chimera in the corner says Ed's name again, softly, in a voice that is not quite right for a chimera. It is too familiar. It knows things a chimera should not know. Edward understands. He attacks Tucker. He grabs him and hits him and screams at him. Screams about what Tucker has done, about Nina, about the fact that Tucker's original certification was earned the same way, that the first speaking chimera was Tucker's wife, that Tucker used his own family both times for no reason except to keep his status and his funding. Tucker does not deny any of it. He says, in a voice that is almost philosophical, that great research requires sacrifice. He says that a true scientist cannot let personal attachment get in the way of discovery. He says that he believes any other alchemist in the same situation would have made the same choice. Alphonse restrains Edward before he can do something he cannot take back. The thing in the corner, the chimera made of Nina and Alexander, watches them with eyes that still hold something of the child who had climbed on Alphonse's armor 3 days ago. It cannot fully understand what has happened to it. It is in pain in a way that has no name, the pain of a being that remembers being something else and no longer has the words to describe the difference. Edward and Alphonse report Tucker to military headquarters. He is placed under house arrest pending investigation and court-martial. But before any official process can conclude, a different figure arrives at the Tucker house. His name is Scar. He is an Ishvalan man, from a people characterized by gray hair, dark skin, and red eyes. And he has a jagged scar across his face in the shape of an X. His right arm is covered in tattoos from wrist to shoulder, strange patterns that are not quite the same as normal alchemy arrays. He hunts state alchemists. He has already killed several by the time he reaches Tucker's door, including a high-ranking officer named Basque Grand, who is mentioned in passing at the start of the story. Scar kills Tucker without ceremony. Tucker had, in Scar's view, abandoned the path of God by using alchemy to do what Tucker did, and the sentence for that is death. Then Scar looks at the chimera. He understands immediately what it is. He understands what future it has, which is no future, or none worth having. He performs a mercy killing, using his right arm's power to end the chimera's existence instantly and without suffering. He says a brief prayer as he does it, then he leaves. When Edward and Alphonse find out what happened, Edward breaks. He goes to military headquarters and sits across from Mustang and talks about it, haltingly, in the way that people talk about things that have cracked something open inside them. He says that he understood, going into this job, that he would see terrible things. He accepted that. He signed the contract knowing that the military would ask things of him that were hard. He thought he could handle it. He is 15 years old, and he has already lost his arm, his leg, his mother, and his childhood. And he thought he had grown a shell thick enough to absorb what this world would throw at him. He could not save one little girl. He is only human. He says this to Mustang while trying very hard to hold himself together and mostly failing. Mustang says almost nothing. He lets Edward sit in the silence of that office and feel what he is feeling, because there is nothing to say that would make it smaller, and a smaller man would try to say something anyway. This is the moment the story announces itself as something different from a standard adventure. The Chimera incident is not a detour. It is a declaration. The world of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood contains real evil, committed by real people for reasons that are entirely human. Fear, ambition, desperation, and the special kind of moral blindness that comes when a person has decided that what they want matters more than the people in their way. Edward gets up. He keeps going. So does Alphonse. They have no other option. But somewhere in Central City, in the offices of military intelligence, a man named Mays Hughes has begun looking into something. He has been looking at maps, at records of military deployments going back decades, at the locations of certain events, battles, disasters, civil unrest, and how they are distributed across the country of Amestris. He is beginning to notice a pattern, and the pattern is so large and so deliberate that part of him does not want to believe it is real. He will not stop looking anyway. That is the kind of man he is. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What Hughes is beginning to see on those maps will, when he follows it far enough, get him killed in a phone booth in the rain. And the story of who killed him and why is the first time the full shape of what this series is really about comes into view. Part 3. The man with the X-shaped scar. He has no name. That is the first thing to understand about him. He had one once, a name given to him by his family, used by his community, carried through the early years of his life in the way that names are carried, as a small and ordinary piece of identity. He gave it up deliberately. He decided, at a specific moment in his life, that the person who had owned that name was gone, and that the thing walking around in that person's body afterward did not deserve to keep it. He is called Scar because of the mark on his face. Two lines crossing each other at the bridge of his nose, running from his left cheek to his right forehead, carved into his skin by something that happened during the war that took everything. Before the war, he was a monk. The Ishvalan people, the group he belongs to, are a deeply religious community. They believe in a god called Ishvala, a god of creation, and their faith is not casual or cultural, it is structural. It shapes how they eat, how they greet each other, how they understand the world. Alchemy in their belief system is a sin, not a minor transgression, a fundamental violation of the natural order. Alchemy rearranges matter according to human will, and human will, in Ishvalan thinking, has no business touching what God created. The boundary between human work and divine creation is sacred, and alchemy crosses it. Scar grew up inside this belief system. He was disciplined and devout, and trained in physical combat as monks of his community were. He had an older brother, a brilliant, restless man who was different from the rest of their community in one specific way. His brother was curious about alchemy, not as a practitioner. He would never have violated his faith that way, but as a scholar, as someone who wanted to understand how it worked, what its rules were, what it was built on. He gathered texts. He studied the arrays. He compared Amestrian alchemy, the dominant system used in the country that had absorbed Ishval into its borders, with a different tradition he had read about, from a distant country to the east called Jing. That eastern tradition was called alkahestry, and it operated on different principles than Amestrian alchemy, drawing on different sources of energy entirely. Scar's brother covered his arms in research. He tattooed arrays directly onto his skin, his left arm covered in a pattern designed to understand and break down matter, his right arm covered in something more complex, something that combined Amestrian and Xingyi's principles in a way no one had done before. He was building something. He did not finish it before the war came. The Ishval Civil War, also called the Ishvalan War of Extermination, began in 1901 and lasted 7 years. The way it started is important because the way it started was not an accident. Ishval is a region in the southeastern part of Amestris, bordering the eastern desert. The Ishvalans had been absorbed into Amestris over time, their territory shrinking as the country's borders expanded, their culture pressed on all sides by Amestrian customs and authority. Tensions between the Ishvalan people and the Amestrian government had been building for years. Religious friction, cultural pressure, the ordinary resentments that accumulate when one group of people is slowly being absorbed by another against their will. In 1901, an Amestrian soldier shot and killed an Ishvalan child, except the soldier was not an Amestrian soldier. The figure who pulled the trigger was a homunculus, one of the artificial human beings created by the entity at the top of this story's chain of evil. This particular homunculus was Envy, a shapeshifter capable of taking on any appearance, any voice, any face. Envy put on the uniform and walked into Ishval and shot a child in broad daylight and walked away, leaving behind a scene that looked to everyone who witnessed it like an Amestrian soldier had just murdered an Ishvalan civilian. The riots that followed were immediate and total. The civil war that grew from those riots lasted 7 years. It was exactly what Envy intended. For most of those 7 years, the Amestrian military fought the Ishvalans with conventional soldiers and conventional weapons. The Ishvalans knew their territory. They used the rocks and the desert and the tight streets of their cities to their advantage. They received weapons from a neighboring country called Erugo, which had its own reasons for wanting Amestris weakened along its southern border. The result was a grinding, bloody stalemate that consumed both sides and produced enormous casualties without producing a resolution. In 1908, Führer King Bradley issued Order 3066. Order 3066 called state alchemists to the front lines. State alchemists are not ordinary soldiers. They are human weapons in the most literal sense. Individuals capable of reshaping matter on a large scale, capable of destroying buildings, of turning the ground itself into a weapon, of producing effects that artillery might take hours to replicate. Sending them into a conflict against a civilian population with limited military resources was not a tactical escalation. It was a conclusion. Among the state alchemists sent to Ishval were Roy Mustang and Riza Hawkeye. Mustang burned. That is the simplest way to say it. He stood at the edge of Ishvalan districts and used his flame alchemy to reduce them to nothing, and the people inside them with them. Hawkeye stood behind him with a rifle, covering his back, and she killed with different tools but with no less efficiency. She was, by her own account later in the story, very good at it. She did not feel good about being good at it. She kept doing it anyway because the orders were clear, and the alternative was court-martial, and she had not yet found the piece of herself that could refuse. Another alchemist sent to Ishval was a man named Solf Kimbley, called the Crimson Alchemist. Kimbley used an ability built into his hands, a rays tattooed on his palms, to cause explosions. He could touch a person and detonate them. He could touch a structure and reduce it to splinters. He worked through the Ishvalan population with a specific kind of enthusiasm that disturbed even the other state alchemists, which is saying something given what all of them were doing. He was eventually court-martialed not for participating in the massacre, which was legal by Amestrian military law, but for using his powers on fellow Amestrian soldiers. He was imprisoned after Ishval and spent years in a military jail before the story brings him back. Scar's brother was killed during the war. The specifics are not fully shown, but Kimbley was involved. Before he died, Scar's brother used his own research arrays to save his younger sibling. He transmitted his right arm onto Scar's body, replacing the arm Scar had lost, grafting his own tattooed limb onto his brother's shoulder. The left arm, with its deconstruction array, went with Scar. The more complex right arm, with its unfinished reconstruction work, came too. Scar woke up in a field hospital. He was alive. His brother was dead. His homeland was ash. The people who had done it were wearing the blue uniforms of the Amestrian military. He walked out of the hospital and into the ruins and began killing. His method uses his right arm, the one that belonged to his brother. The deconstruction array breaks down whatever he touches at a fundamental level. He places his hand on a person's arm or head, and the tissue comes apart. It is instant. It is irreversible. He uses it exclusively on state alchemists, the people he holds directly responsible for what happened to his people. He is not subtle about what he is doing or why. He considers it justice. He considers it the will of Ishvala. He has named himself after his scar because he has already decided he is no longer a person. He is a function. He exists to kill alchemists. When that work is done, he expects to die. This is the man the Elric brothers keep running into. The first encounter happens early in the story and is terrifying for a simple reason. Scar nearly kills Edward. He gets his hand on Edward's automail arm and destroys it completely. He is about to do the same to Edward's body when Alphonse intervenes and buys enough time for them to escape. Scar is not cruel about it. He is not angry in a hot, emotional way. He simply believes he is right, and Edward is a state alchemist, and state alchemists die. The fact that Edward is 15 and had nothing to do with Ishval does not register as a meaningful distinction in the moral system Scar is operating within. They encounter each other several more times throughout the early part of the story. The encounter that changes something is the one involving Winry. Winry Rockbell grew up in Rezembul. Her parents were doctors, Yuri and Sarah Rockbell, and when the Ishval War was happening, her parents went there. They went as medical workers, not soldiers. They operated a field hospital in the middle of the conflict zone and treated anyone who came to them. Amestrian soldiers, Ishvalan civilians, anyone who was wounded and needed help. They did not choose sides. They chose patience. Scar came to their hospital after an encounter with Kimbley. He was badly injured. His brother had just died, saving him. When he woke up in the Rockbell hospital, he was surrounded by the faces of Amestrian people, and he was in a state of grief so total that it had become something closer to madness. He killed the Rockbells. He walked out of their hospital and into the burning remains of Ishval, and he became Scar. Winry did not know any of this. She knew her parents had gone to Ishval. She knew they had not come back. She had been told they died in the war, which was true, but the specifics had been kept from her. She grew up in Rezembul with Pinako, working on automail, building the prosthetics that Edward would wear, without knowing that the man who kept attacking her closest friends was the same man who had killed her mother and father. She finds out during a confrontation that happens in a public place, with no warning and no preparation. Edward and Scar are fighting, or about to fight, and Winry is present, and in the chaos, someone says it plainly where she can hear it. Scar killed the Rockbells. Winry gets hold of a gun. She points it at Scar. Her hands are shaking. She is not a soldier. She has never hurt anyone. Her hands, as Edward has noted before, are built for repairing things. She builds and fixes. Automail limbs, mechanical joints, the prosthetics that let broken people move through the world again. The gun in her hands is an object from a completely different world than the one she has built for herself. She does not fire. She stands there with the gun pointed at the man who killed her parents, and she cannot do it. And Scar, who has killed state alchemists without hesitation, stands still and lets her decide. He does not run. He does not try to disarm her. He waits. She lowers the gun. She is crying. Edward, watching this, says something that has stayed with readers and viewers ever since. He tells her that her hands are not made for that. He says it simply, without drama. Her hands are for something else. He is not telling her she is weak. He is telling her she is something more specific than a person with a gun, and that specificity is not a limitation. What happens to Scar after this is a long, slow arc across the rest of the story. He does not stop being Scar overnight. He does not stop being dangerous. But Winry's inability to pull that trigger does something to him, creates a small crack in the absolute certainty that has been holding him together since the war. A girl whose parents he murdered could not kill him, and the reason she could not was not fear. She had the gun. She had the reason. She simply chose not to. That choice lodges in him like a splinter. As the story continues, Scar moves from an enemy to something more complicated. Not quite an ally, not for a long time, but someone whose goals begin to intersect with the brothers' goals in ways that neither side fully planned. He has his brother's incomplete research arrays on his arm, and those arrays turn out to contain something important, something his brother was building toward across years of study that neither Scar nor anyone else fully understood until the final chapters of the story. His brother was working on a way to fight back, not with violence, with knowledge. The specific, technical, alchemic knowledge of how the trap around Amestris was built, and how to reverse it. Scar carries that knowledge in his skin without knowing its full significance for most of the story. He is walking around with the answer tattooed on his brother's arm, attached to his own body, and he does not know it yet. Neither does anyone else. The shape of what that answer is, and who benefits from it, becomes clear only in the final hours of the story. But the foundation was laid in the last days of the Ishval War, by a dying scholar who loved his brother enough to give him his arm, and who is brilliant enough to see further ahead than almost anyone else in the entire series. That scholar never got a name either. Like his brother, he is remembered by what he left behind. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. While Scar moves through the story carrying his brother's unfinished work, something is happening in Central City that has nothing to do with alchemy, and everything to do with a pattern drawn across an entire country. And the man who sees it first is running out of time to tell anyone what he has found. Part 4. The Death of Maze Hughes. Maze Hughes is the kind of person who makes every room slightly warmer just by being in it. He is a lieutenant colonel in the Amestrian military, stationed in Central City in the investigations office. He is broad-shouldered and tall, with small round glasses and a wide, easy smile that he wears almost constantly. He loves two things with an intensity that borders on absurd. The first is his wife, Gracia. The second is his daughter, Alicia, who is 3 years old when the story begins, and who Hughes considers, without any trace of irony or exaggeration, the most extraordinary human being who has ever lived. He carries photographs of them everywhere. He shows these photographs to anyone who stands still long enough to be shown them. He interrupts conversations, meetings, and military briefings to produce the photographs and deliver a small speech about how beautiful his wife is, how talented his daughter is, how the drawing Alicia made last Tuesday was the work of a genuine genius, how nobody in the history of Amestris has ever made a drawing that good. His colleagues, particularly Mustang, who has known him since they were both young officers, respond to this with the weary patience of people who have heard it many times and love him anyway. Hughes and Mustang served together in the Ishval War. They were in the same unit, in the same fire, making the same impossible choices that everyone in that war had to make. What came out of that shared experience was a friendship built on something deeper than professional respect. Mustang has a plan, a long, careful, ambitious plan to climb the military ranks and eventually reform the entire system from the inside. Hughes believes in that plan. He has positioned himself in the investigations office specifically because it gives him access to information and records that support what Mustang is trying to do. He describes his role, with characteristic cheerfulness, as supporting Mustang from below so that Mustang can rise. He means it as a joke. He also means it entirely seriously. The investigations office is exactly what it sounds like. The branch of the military that examines records, tracks information, compiles data on anything and everything that might be relevant to military operations. Hughes is good at his job in the specific way that naturally curious people are good at jobs that require connecting scattered pieces of information into coherent pictures. He reads widely. He remembers things. He notices when something that should fit does not quite fit, and he follows that noticing until he understands why. This is the quality that gets him killed. It starts with the Elric brothers. After the Nina Tucker incident, Edward comes to Hughes for help. He tells Hughes what he and Alphonse have been finding as they investigate the Philosopher's Stone, the strange gaps in the official research, the inconsistencies in what the military has made public versus what the classified files contain, the sense that the stone is connected to something larger than any individual alchemist's project. Hughes listens to all of this carefully. He files it. He tells Edward to keep going and to keep him informed. Then Hughes starts pulling records himself. He begins with military deployment histories, where troops have been sent over the past several decades, when, in what numbers, and for what stated reason. He cross-references these with records of civil unrest, border skirmishes, and major incidents across Amestris. He is looking for a pattern, the way a person looks for a pattern in a set of numbers, not expecting to find one, but checking anyway because something in the data feels uneven. He finds a pattern. The locations of major conflicts and large-scale casualties across Amestris, going back generations, are not random. They are distributed across the country in a way that is too deliberate to be coincidence. Border clashes in the north, the Ishval massacre in the southeast, unrest in the east, the south, the west. When Hughes maps these locations against each other, the shape they form is not accidental. It is geometric. It is, if you know enough about alchemy to recognize such things, the rough outline of a transmutation array drawn across an entire country, with each site of mass death marking a key point on that array. Hughes is not a state alchemist. He does not have the deep technical knowledge to fully understand what he is looking at, but he is intelligent enough to understand that what he is looking at is a plan. Someone has been arranging large-scale death at specific geographic points across Amestris for a very long time, and the scale of that arrangement means the someone in question is not a rogue individual. This reaches into the highest levels of the military, possibly higher. He calls Mustang. He cannot say what he has found directly, not on a military line. He speaks in careful, coded language, enough to communicate that he has found something significant, not enough to communicate the specifics to anyone who might be listening. Mustang understands that something is wrong from the way Hughes sounds. Hughes tells him to come to Central as soon as his transfer allows. He says it will be explained in person. He does not get to explain it in person. The night Hughes dies, he is working late. He has been at his desk for hours, surrounded by maps and files, pushing the picture he has assembled towards something complete enough to act on. He calls a public telephone booth outside his building, using an outside line rather than the military network, because he no longer trusts the military network. He is trying to reach Mustang. He is trying to get the information out before anyone realizes he has it. He does not finish the call. Envy finds him in the phone booth. Envy is the shapeshifter, the homunculus who started the Ishval War by wearing an Amestrian soldier's face and shooting a child. Envy's ability is total and seamless. Any face, any voice, any body. Height, weight, clothing, the specific way a person holds their shoulders, all of it perfectly replicated. Envy shifts into the face of Gracia, Hughes's wife. Hughes raises his weapon. He has it pointed. His hands are steady. He is a trained soldier and he knows how to hold a gun and he is prepared to shoot. And then he is looking at his wife's face, her voice, her eyes, the exact way she tilts her head when she is worried about him. His hands drop. That half second is all Envy needs. Hughes is shot. He collapses in the phone booth. He manages to drag himself partway out before his strength gives out. He does not survive. What follows is a sequence that the series handles with a specific and deliberate quietness. There is no dramatic score underneath it, no swelling music telling the audience how to feel. There is a funeral in the rain. There are his colleagues standing in a row in their uniforms. There is Gracia, holding herself together with the kind of rigid control that people use when they are saving their real grief for a private room. There is Alicia. Alicia is 3 years old. She does not understand funerals. She stands at the graveside in her small dress, and she asks why they are putting her daddy in the ground. She says he does not like dark places. She says he will be cold. She does not understand why nobody is answering her, why the adults around her are looking at the ground or the sky or anywhere except at her face. The camera, the story's eye, does not look away from this. It is the most deliberately painful sequence in the entire first half of the series, and it is painful in a specific way that is worth understanding. Maes Hughes was not a central character in terms of plot function. He was not an alchemist. He was not on a quest. He did not have an arc built around personal transformation or a dark history that needed resolving. He was a man who loved his wife and his daughter and his best friend and his job, and he was good at all 4 of those things. And he died in a phone booth because he was too good at his job, and could not stop doing it even when it became dangerous. His death works as well as it does because the story spent time making him real before it took him away. Every photograph, every interruption, every moment of cheerful absurdity in the middle of serious conversations. All of that was the story building something so that the removal of it would land exactly as hard as it does. Mustang finds out at the funeral. He stands at the graveside and says almost nothing. Later, in private, Hawkeye finds him. He tells her it is raining. He is looking upward, which is a strange thing to do in the rain, and his voice is completely flat, and she understands what he means. Roy Mustang cannot cry in public. He is a colonel in the Amestrian military, and he has an image and a plan and a position to protect. And none of those things allow for public grief. Hawkeye stands with him in the rain and does not say anything, because there is nothing to say. His grief goes somewhere else. It goes into the plan. It goes into the quiet, controlled fury of a person who has decided that the system responsible for this will be dismantled, and that he will be the one to dismantle it, and that he will do it carefully and completely, and not before he is in a position to make it count. Edward and Alphonse find out later. They are on a train when they learn it from another officer, by accident, because Mustang had told the woman to say Hughes had simply retired. He did not want the brothers to know. He did not want them to carry the weight of knowing that Hughes had been killed while investigating something Edward had asked him to look into. Hawkeye, who disagreed with this decision, said so plainly. Mustang protected the brothers anyway, for as long as he could. They find out anyway. Edward takes it hard in the way that angry, guilty people take hard news, by going very quiet and then very loud and then quiet again. He knows what Hughes was investigating. He knows why. He knows his name is in the chain of events that led to that phone booth. He keeps going. So does Alphonse. What else is there to do? The investigation into Hughes's death is officially stalled almost immediately. Someone in Central Command has ordered that the matter be closed, and the order is obeyed by everyone who values their career more than the truth. Mustang investigates quietly, in parallel, gathering pieces through Hawkeye and his small network of loyal officers. He gets to the answer eventually, the answer of who pulled the trigger and why and on whose orders, but not before a great deal more of the story has unfolded. What Hughes found on those maps is not lost. He died before he could pass it to Mustang directly, but the information exists. The records are in the building. The pattern is there for anyone willing to look. And eventually the right people do look, and what they see confirms everything Hughes suspected and is worse than he had imagined. The country of Amestris was designed from its foundation to be a killing machine. Every border, every deployment, every manufactured war, all of it has been pointing toward a single event that the people running this operation have been preparing for 400 years. They call it the Promised Day, and the man who has been building toward the Promised Day since before Amestris existed is a figure most people in this story have never heard of. He lives beneath Central City in tunnels and darkness. He has worn many faces across many centuries. He was born, if born is the right word, from a drop of blood in a glass bottle in an ancient kingdom that no longer exists. He is the one who gave Cornello his unstable stone. He is the one who sent Envy to start the Ishval War. He is the one who gave Bradley his power and his position and his eye. He is, at the root of it, the reason Trisha Elric died without her husband, and the reason two boys knelt in a circle on a winter night and lost everything trying to get her back. His name, in the language of his children, the homunculi who call him their father, is simply Father. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The full story of what Father is, where he came from, and what he has been building for 400 years begins in a kingdom that turned to dust before Amestris was even a name on a map. And it begins with a drop of blood from a slave boy who had no name. Part 5. The Dwarf in the Flask and the Nation Built to Burn. Before Amestris existed, there was Xerxes. Xerxes was an advanced and prosperous kingdom that sat in the middle of a vast desert. The same desert that now separates the eastern and western parts of the continent. It had a king. It had a population of over 1 million people. It had scholars and soldiers and merchants and slaves. And among its slaves was a young man who had no name, only a number. He was called Slave 23. He was a house slave in the service of a renowned alchemist who worked directly for the king of Xerxes. The work he did was ordinary slave work. Cleaning, carrying, running errands, the invisible labor that keeps a wealthy household functioning. He had gold eyes and gold hair and a sharp mind that had nowhere particular to go. He was not educated. He had no prospects. He existed at the bottom of a society that had decided people like him did not need names. Then his master conducted an experiment. The master was trying to capture a fragment of something that existed beyond the physical world, a piece of the vast knowledge that sits on the other side of what alchemists call the gate of truth. To anchor this fragment in the physical world, he needed a living blood source. He used Slave 23. He took the young man's blood and used it as the foundation for a containment vessel, a small glass flask. And inside that flask, something came to life. It was tiny, dark, a small mass of shadow with a single eye and a mouth that could form words. It had no body. It could not survive outside the flask. But it was alive, and it was aware, and it knew things that no human being could have taught it. Deep structural knowledge about the nature of existence, the mechanics of matter, the foundations on which all alchemy is built. The people of Xerxes would come to call it the dwarf in the flask. Later, it would call itself homunculus. Eventually, the children it created would call it father. The first thing it did was befriend Slave 23. This was not pure kindness. The dwarf in the flask was a calculating creature, and it understood from the beginning that its survival and eventual freedom depended on having an ally inside the human world. Slave 23 was the obvious choice, the young man whose blood had been used in the creation process, which meant there was already a connection between them, and who was low enough in the social order that he had no loyalty to protect and nothing to lose by forming an unusual friendship with a talking shadow in a bottle. The dwarf gave the young man three things. The first was a name. It pulled the name from the texts it had absorbed. Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim, a long and complicated name from alchemic tradition, shortened immediately to Van Hohenheim. The young man who had been called 23 for his entire life now had a name. And the weight of that, the simple fact of being named, of being addressed as a specific person rather than a numbered object, changed something in him. The second gift was education. The dwarf taught Hohenheim to read, to write, to understand mathematics and science, and the foundations of alchemy. It did this methodically, over years, turning an uneducated slave into one of the most knowledgeable alchemists in the kingdom. Hohenheim absorbed everything. He had always been intelligent. The intelligence had simply never had anywhere to go. Now it had direction. The third gift was access. Hohenheim rose in the household, then in the broader network of the king's scholars. His knowledge made him valuable. His value gave him freedom of movement, resources, a position. He went from the bottom of Xerxes' society to something approaching its intellectual upper tier, all because a small, dark creature in a glass bottle decided he was useful. They talked. For years they talked. Hohenheim asked the dwarf what it wanted, what would make it happy. The dwarf told him plainly, it wanted to exist outside the flask. It wanted a real body. It wanted to not be confined to a bottle for the rest of its existence. Hohenheim understood this. He had spent his own early life in a different kind of confinement, and he recognized in the dwarf's longing something that resembled his own early hunger for something larger than what he had been given. Then, the king of Xerxes got involved. The king was old and frightened of death in the way that powerful people often are. Not afraid of dying in battle, not afraid of sacrifice, but deeply, privately terrified of simply ceasing to exist after a life of total control. He had heard of the creature in his alchemist's laboratory. He summoned it. He asked it the question that wealthy and powerful people always ask when they encounter something that exists outside normal understanding. He asked if it could make him immortal. The dwarf said yes. The process it described required the construction of an enormous transmutation circle, so large that it would need to encompass the entire kingdom. Every person in Xerxes would need to be positioned within the circle for it to function. The circle would channel the energy of all those lives toward a single point, and from that channeling, the king would receive what he wanted. The king began construction immediately, ordering his people to build what he was told to build, placing them where he was told to place them, moving an entire civilization into position over the course of years, without any of them understanding what they were being arranged for. Hohenheim did not know either, not at first. He was included in the plans, positioned at a specific location within the circle, the true center, as it turned out, though he was not told this. He stood at his position, holding the flask that contained the dwarf, and when the circle activated, he found out what the plan actually was. The dwarf had given the king false information about where the center of the circle was. The king believed himself to be at the center, the point where the energy would converge and the immortality would be conferred. He was wrong. The real center was where Hohenheim stood. When the circle activated, every soul in Xerxes was pulled from its body. Over 1 million people. The king, his court, his soldiers, his scholars, every slave and merchant and child and elder in the kingdom. All of them, simultaneously, in a single instant, stripped of life and condensed into raw spiritual energy that flooded toward the 2 points at the true center of the array, Hohenheim and the dwarf. Roughly 500,000 souls poured into Hohenheim. The other half poured into the dwarf, giving it the energy it needed to construct a real body for itself, a physical form that it built using Hohenheim's appearance as its template, because Hohenheim's blood was its origin, and his form was the only human template it had full access to. When the process was finished, Xerxes was empty. Every building standing, every structure intact, not a stone out of place, and not a single living person remaining. 1 million people had simply ceased to exist, replaced by 2 beings standing in the center of a dead kingdom, one horrified, one satisfied. Hohenheim woke to this. He looked at what had happened around him. He looked at the creature standing before him wearing his face. Same height, same gold hair, same gold eyes. Identical in almost every way, except that this new body had platinum-colored hair where his was golden, and a face that was slightly older and colder. He understood immediately what had been done to him, and to everyone around him. He could feel them. The souls inside him, hundreds of thousands of individual people, each one a distinct consciousness, each one aware of what had happened, each one trapped inside the body of a man they had never met. They spoke to him. They pressed against the inside of his skin. He was not one person anymore. He was one person containing a multitude, and he was horrified by it, and he did not know how to put it right. The dwarf, now with a body, now free of the flask, now calling itself by the name that the homunculi would eventually use for it, offered no apology. It told Hohenheim that it had given him a gift, eternal life, a body that would not age or die, the same gift it had given itself. Hohenheim could have seen this as a reward. He did not. He left. He walked away from the ruins of Xerxes and into the desert, and spent the following years in a particular kind of anguish, learning the names of every soul inside him, speaking to each one, getting to know them individually, their memories, their families, their lives. He could not undo what had been done. He could not return them to bodies that no longer existed, but he could refuse to treat them as fuel. He could know them as people. He spent decades doing exactly that, moving across the continent, teaching what he knew to people he met along the way. He taught the basics of what he understood about alchemy to people in a distant eastern country called Qing, and what those people developed from his teaching eventually became their own distinct tradition called alkahestry. The creature he left behind in Xerxes was doing something else entirely. The dwarf had not escaped its flask in order to rest. It had a larger vision. If the people of Xerxes could be sacrificed to give it a body and power, then the people of an entire country, a much larger country, designed and built from the ground up for exactly this purpose, could be sacrificed to give it something more. Not just a body, not just power, everything. The complete knowledge and energy of God itself. The truth behind the gate, absorbed entirely, contained within a single being. To achieve this, it needed a country shaped like a transmutation circle. It founded Amestris. This is not a metaphor. The country of Amestris, its borders, its layout, the specific locations of its cities and military fortifications and population centers, was designed by this creature across 4 centuries as a functional transmutation array drawn in geography. Every war that expanded Amestris's borders was expanding the circle. Every massacre at a key location was marking a point on the array with the specific kind of energy that comes from mass death and suffering. The Führer's office, the military structure, the state alchemist program, all of it existed to give the creature control over the population it needed in position when the time came. To manage a country, it needed agents. It created them from itself, from its own body, which was itself a philosopher's stone, a dense concentration of souls. It extracted specific qualities, traits that it considered beneath a being of its ambitions: pride, greed, envy, lust, gluttony, sloth, wrath. It pulled each of these qualities out of itself and gave them bodies and names and purposes. These were the homunculi, 7 artificial human beings, each one carrying a fragment of the creature's own power, each one assigned a role in the centuries-long management of the plan. Wrath was given to the military. King Bradley, the Führer who issued Order 3066 and sent state alchemists into Ishval, was wrath. He had been an ordinary human being once, selected as a child from a group of test subjects, subjected to a process that should have killed him, and he survived where all the others died because he was exceptional. The Philosopher's Stone that gave him his power sits inside his body still. Pride was given a different kind of concealment. Pride is the oldest homunculus, the most powerful, the one closest to the creature's original nature. Pride was hidden inside the body of a child, a small boy named Salim Bradley, presented to the world as King Bradley's adopted son. This small, polite, well-dressed child is the oldest and most dangerous of all the homunculi, and almost no one in the story suspects it until it is too late. The others, lust, greed, envy, gluttony, sloth, each played their roles. Lust managed operations. Envy carried out missions requiring deception. Gluttony served as a weapon and a disposal mechanism. Sloth dug tunnels beneath Central City for decades, building the physical infrastructure that the final stage of the plan required. Hohenheim, traveling the world with hundreds of thousands of souls living inside him, eventually worked out what the creature was building. He found the shape of a Amestris on a map and understood what he was looking at. He had seen this before. He had stood at the center of it once, in Xerxes, and watched 1 million people disappear in a single breath. He could not let it happen again. He began making his own preparations. Quietly, without announcing himself, he traveled across Amestris and deposited fragments of his Philosopher's Stone, fragments of the souls inside him, at specific points throughout the country. He was building a counter-array, a reverse circuit that could, if activated at the right moment, disrupt the creature's plan and push the stolen souls of Amestris back into their bodies, rather than allowing them to be consumed. He did not have anyone to help him with this. He did it alone, over years, and then he came home to Rezembul and found his house burned down, and learned that his wife Trisha had died while he was away, and that his 2 sons had attempted human transmutation to bring her back and had paid the price for it. He stood at her grave for a long time. Then he kept going, because the promised day was coming, and he was the only person in the world who understood the full shape of what was about to happen. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. While Hohenheim was quietly building his counterplan in the shadows, the creature's most visible instrument of destruction had already done its bloodiest work, and the men and women who carried out that work in Ishval are still alive, still in uniform, and still carrying what they did there in the silence behind everything they say. Part 6. The Ishval Massacre. There is a memory that every adult soldier in this story carries. Not all of them talk about it, most of them do not. It lives behind their eyes in the specific way that certain memories live, not visited willingly, not forgotten either, just present. A permanent resident in the back of the mind that occasionally steps forward without being invited and stands there until it is done. The memory is Ishval. To understand what happened there, it helps to understand what Ishval was before the war reached it. Ishval was a region in the southeastern part of Amestris, where the land starts to dry out and the green hills of the interior give way to rock and sand and the beginning of the eastern desert. The Ishvalan people had lived there for a very long time, long before Amestris absorbed their territory into its borders, long before the country that now controlled their land even existed. They had their own language, their own customs, their own way of organizing their communities. Their faith in Ishvala, their god of creation, was not separate from their daily lives. It was woven into everything. How they ate, how they raised their children, how they buried their dead, how they understood their own place in the world. They were not a warlike people. They were, by the account of everyone who knew them before the war, a community defined by a specific kind of dignified endurance. They had survived being absorbed into a foreign country. They had survived the gradual shrinking of their territory as Amestris redrew boundaries around them. They had survived decades of cultural pressure and institutional discrimination. They survived all of it through the same quality that shows up repeatedly in descriptions of them: a deep, communal rootedness. They knew who they were. That knowledge held them together when external forces tried to pull them apart. The conflict between the Ishvalan people and the Amestrian government had been building for years before 1901. Tensions over land, over cultural autonomy, over the way Amestrian soldiers treated Ishvalan civilians in their own territory. All of it had created a situation that was fragile and pressurized, and needed only the right kind of spark to explode. Envy provided the spark. In 1901, wearing the face and uniform of an Amestrian soldier, Envy walked into Ishval and shot an Ishvalan child in broad daylight. The child died. The witnesses who saw it, and there were witnesses, because envy chose a public location deliberately, responded the way any community responds to the murder of a child by an occupying force. With grief first, then with fury, then with action. The riots that followed spread quickly. The Amestrian military responded with force. The force generated more resistance. The resistance justified more force. Within a short time, the situation had become a full civil war, and the Amestrian military found itself fighting a population that knew its own terrain far better than any outside army could, that used the rocks and the narrow streets and the desert as weapons, and that received a steady supply of outside support from Urugo, a neighboring country that had its own reasons for wanting Amestris tied up in an internal conflict. The war ground on for 7 years. 7 years of fighting in the dust and the heat, of casualties on both sides accumulating without resolution, of a stalemate that the Amestrian military's conventional forces could not break. 7 years of a conflict that was, from the very beginning, entirely manufactured, designed not to be won quickly, but to be sustained long enough to carve the required mark into the geography of the country, to produce the quantity of death and suffering that the plan required at that specific location on the nationwide array. In 1908, King Bradley issued Order 3066. The order was simple in its language and total in its implications. State alchemists were to be deployed to the front lines of the Ishval conflict immediately. They were to be used as primary offensive weapons. Their objective was not to subdue the Ishvalan resistance, or negotiate a settlement, or achieve any of the stated political goals that had nominally justified the war. Their objective was to end it, completely, finally. Roy Mustang was 23 years old when he received his orders. He had been a state alchemist for several years by that point. He had trained hard and worked hard, and moved up through the ranks with the focused ambition of someone who knows exactly where he wants to go, and is building every day toward getting there. He had a plan for his career, and for the country, and the plan was good and careful, and built on a genuine belief that Amestris could be something better than what it currently was. He had not, until Ishval, been required to do anything that tested that plan against reality in the most direct possible way. He went to Ishval. What happened there is shown in the series through a flashback episode, the story pausing its forward motion to go back and fill in the full picture of what this war actually looked like from the ground. The episode is not easy to watch, and the script here will not dress it up, because the story itself does not dress it up. Mustang burned people. He stood at the edges of Ishvalan districts, and he used his flame alchemy to destroy them, building by building, block by block. He is the flame alchemist. His specialty is the precise creation and direction of fire, achieved through the spark generated by his specialized gloves, in combination with the array patterns woven into them. In the right circumstances, with the right targets, this ability is extraordinary. In Ishval, in 1908, the targets were not military fortifications or weapon depots. They were neighborhoods where people lived. He did not stop. He received his orders, and he carried them out, and he moved to the next location and carried them out there too. He told himself what soldiers often tell themselves in impossible situations, that the orders were legitimate, that the chain of command existed for a reason, that refusing would change nothing except his own fate, that he was one person in a large machine, and the machine would keep moving whether he participated or not. He told himself these things, and he kept burning. Riza Hawkeye stood behind him with a rifle. Hawkeye is a sniper. Her ability with a gun is as precise as Mustang's ability with flame. She can hit targets at extreme range, in difficult conditions, without hesitation. In Ishval, she used this ability in the way the military required of her. She covered Mustang's back. She provided suppressing fire. She killed people who were trying to kill him, and people who were trying to run, and people who happened to be in positions that the military's forward advance made dangerous. She said years later, in a conversation with Edward, that she killed so many people in Ishval that she lost the ability to feel the weight of individual deaths. They stopped being events and became simply conditions, things that were true, things she had caused, things that accumulated without any individual moment rising above the others. She said this without self-pity. She said it as a fact about what that experience had done to her. She said that she and Mustang would both deserve to stand trial for what they did there, and that they were both aware of this, and that this awareness was part of why they kept going. Because stopping before they had built something worth building with the time they had would mean all of it had produced nothing at all. Alex Louis Armstrong was there too. Armstrong is a large, extraordinarily muscular man who wears his emotions openly and without embarrassment. He cries easily, laughs easily, and carries an overwhelming physical presence that he somehow manages to make entirely warm rather than threatening. He is one of the more senior state alchemists under Mustang's eventual command. In Ishval, he was given the same orders as everyone else, and he followed them until he could not. At a certain point in the fighting, Armstrong simply stopped. He was in the middle of an operation, and he put down his arms and refused to continue. He was not court-martialed for this. He was removed from the front lines and sent back. The official record treats his removal as a medical matter. Battle stress, something along those lines. Armstrong does not talk about what specifically happened to break him in that moment. He has never talked about it. He carries Ishval the way all of them carry it, which is to say poorly and continuously, the weight of it surfacing at unexpected moments in his otherwise large and cheerful presence. The story shows him, in the Ishval flashback, holding the body of a dead Ishvalan child, just holding it, standing in the ruins with this child in his arms and his face doing something that his face is not usually asked to do. That image is not explained or contextualized by the narrative. It is simply shown, and then the story moves on, the way the story itself moved on at the time, and the way Armstrong has been moving on ever since. Solf Kimbley was there. Kimbley is different from the others in a way that matters. Mustang burned because he was ordered to and could not find the mechanism inside himself that would have let him refuse. Hawkeye shot because she was covering Mustang and had made her own calculation about what her presence next to him was worth. Armstrong broke because something inside him hit a wall. Kimbley, the Crimson Alchemist, who could create explosions by touching things with his tattooed palms, did not break. He did not struggle. He enjoyed it. This is stated plainly in the series and is not softened. Kimbley operated in Ishval with an enthusiasm that disturbed the people around him, including people who were themselves doing terrible things. He was eventually court-martialed, but not for anything he did to Ishvalan civilians. He was imprisoned because he used his abilities on Amestrian military personnel. He killed soldiers on his own side, for reasons the series leaves somewhat ambiguous, but that paint a picture of someone who had simply decided that the normal rules did not apply to him and acted accordingly. He was put in prison after Ishval. He would stay there for years, until the people running the plan needed him again. The Ishvalan high priest surrendered personally to King Bradley during the war, after the state alchemists had flattened the first several major districts. The priest came forward with his senior officials and offered his own life in exchange for the lives of the remaining Ishvalans. Tens of thousands of people who were still alive, still hiding in the ruins of their communities, still hoping that the worst was over. Bradley refused. He told the priest that a single human life was not an equivalent exchange for the lives of tens of thousands. He said this using the language of alchemy, the language of the system that Ishvalans considered a sin against their god, to explain why their spiritual leader's sacrifice meant nothing to him. The priest told Bradley that God would strike him down for what he was doing. Bradley said he had been hearing that since the operation began and was still waiting. The Ishvalan people who survived the war were driven out. Their homeland was destroyed. Their communities scattered across the country, surviving in small groups wherever they could find shelter that Amestrian society would permit them. Scar was one of these survivors. His survival was, as described in his own section of this story, an accident of his brother's love and his own physical endurance. After the war ended, a number of state alchemists resigned their certifications. They gave back their pocket watches and their titles and their funding and walked away from the military. The official record notes this as a routine turnover. Most people who knew what it actually meant understood that these were people who could not continue wearing the title of state alchemist after what that title had been used for in Ishval. Mustang did not resign. Hawkeye did not resign. They stayed, and their staying was a decision, and the decision was not made carelessly. Mustang's stated goal, becoming Führer and transforming Amestris into a country with a proper democratic government, with civilian oversight of the military, with the legal mechanisms to prevent what happened in Ishval from happening again, required staying inside the system. You cannot reform a system from outside it. You cannot reach its controls if you have given up your place within it. So he stayed, and he climbed, and he burned Ishval into the back of his mind, and he kept going, carrying it the way all of them carried it, knowing that the only thing that would make it mean anything was what came after. Hawkeye stayed because Mustang stayed. This is the simple version. The more complete version is that Hawkeye had her own relationship to Ishval, her own accounting of what she had done there, and her own understanding of what it would take to make it count for something. She positioned herself beside Mustang, not as a subordinate following orders, but as someone who had looked at his plan and decided it was worth her presence. She is his sniper in the deepest sense, the person covering his back, watching the angles he cannot see, prepared to stop him if he goes wrong. She told him once, in a quiet moment the series shows without making a large production of it, that if he ever went down a dark path, if the ambition curdled into something that stopped resembling justice, she would stop him herself. He accepted this condition without argument. He understood what she meant, and he agreed that it was right. They are, in their strange and formal and deeply serious way, each other's most important person. The series shows this through what they do not say as much as what they do, through the way they stand near each other in dangerous situations, through the specific quality of attention Hawkeye pays to everything that happens around him. Ishval made them both, not into better people in any simple sense, into people who understand, at a depth most people never reach, what it costs when a government decides that some lives are acceptable losses. They carry that understanding as both a wound and a reason. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. While Mustang and Hawkeye carry Ishval in silence and keep climbing the ranks that will eventually give them the power to do something about it, the brothers are moving north, toward a fortress on the edge of the frozen tundra, where a general with no patience for weakness is about to show them what the plan looks like from a completely different angle. Part 7. Fort Briggs and the Prince Who Swallowed Greed. The north of Amestris is a different world from everything south of it. Down south, there are cities and deserts and the slow political machinery of Central Command. There are offices and uniforms, and the careful performance of rank and order. There are people who spend their careers managing appearances, climbing hierarchies, saying the right things to the right people in the right rooms. The south of Amestris is a place where power operates through procedure. The north operates through cold. Fort Briggs sits at the very top of the country, pressed against the Drachman border, surrounded on all sides by mountains and ice and wind that comes off the peaks in gusts strong enough to knock a person sideways. The fortress itself is enormous. Carved into the rock of the mountain range, a structure of iron and stone that looks less like a military installation and more like something the mountain grew. It does not look like a place that was built. It looks like a place that has always been there, waiting, and that humans eventually moved into because there was nowhere else to go. The soldiers stationed at Briggs are not like soldiers anywhere else in Amestris. They are harder, not in the performed, theatrical way that certain military units perform hardness, not the kind of toughness that gets announced in speeches or demonstrated through ritual. The Briggs soldiers are hard the way the mountain they live in is hard, quietly, completely, without any particular interest in whether you notice. They have been shaped by the cold and the isolation and the genuine daily reality of defending a border against a neighboring country, Drachma, that has real military capacity and real territorial ambitions. The threat at Briggs is not hypothetical. People die there. The soldiers know this, and they go about their work anyway. The person who shaped them into what they are is General Olivier Mira Armstrong. Olivier is Alex Armstrong's older sister, and the two of them are similar in exactly the ways you would expect siblings to be similar, and completely different in every other way. Alex is warm and emotional and expressive. Olivier is cold and precise and entirely without sentimentality. Alex cries openly at moments of beauty or sadness. Olivier would not cry in public if her life depended on it, and possibly not in private either. Alex wears his emotions the way he wears his uniform, openly, proudly, with no attempt at concealment. Olivier conceals everything except her authority, which she wears like the blade she carries at her side. She is not cruel. That distinction matters. Cruelty requires a personal investment in someone else's suffering, and Olivier does not have that kind of investment in anything except the defense of Briggs and the survival of the people under her command. She is demanding because the environment demands it. She is unsentimental because sentiment gets people killed in the mountains. She operates on a philosophy she states plainly when the Elric brothers arrive at the fortress. In the survival of the fittest, the weak get left behind, and her job is to make sure nobody under her command is weak. Edward and Alphonse arrive at Briggs during a winter that has turned particularly brutal, following a trail that has led them north toward research that might help them understand the full scope of what they are dealing with. They do not arrive gracefully. They arrive half-frozen, having fought their way through a blizzard and an encounter with Kimbley, who has been released from prison and given a new assignment by the people running the plan. And they present themselves at the fortress gates, looking considerably worse than any state alchemist probably should. Olivier does not treat them with the deference that their state alchemist status would earn them at any other military installation. She treats them as what they are in her environment, two people who showed up at her door needing help, which means they are, by her accounting, temporarily beneath her. She extracts information from them as the price of shelter and warmth. She is not unpleasant about it. She is simply very clear about how transactions work in her world. What the brothers bring her, in exchange for the warmth and the shelter and her willingness to listen, is the shape of the plan. They tell her what they have pieced together: the nationwide transmutation circle, the manufactured wars, the homunculi operating inside the military's highest levels. They tell her that Briggs is likely a key location in that plan, that the North has a role to play in what is coming, that someone inside Central Command already knows about Briggs and is watching it. Olivier listens to all of this without visible reaction. Then she tells them they had better be right, because the alternative is that they have wasted her time, and she does not forgive wasted time. She begins her own investigation quietly and immediately. What she finds beneath Briggs, literally beneath it, in the tunnels under the mountain, confirms everything the brothers have said and then exceeds it. There is something digging beneath the fortress, something enormous, moving through the rock with a methodical patience that suggests it has been at this work for a very long time. The tunnel system that exists below Fort Briggs connects, when followed far enough, to a network that runs beneath the entire country. These tunnels are the physical infrastructure of the plan, the channels through which energy will flow on the promised day, the hidden architecture of a trap built over centuries. The thing doing the digging is Sloth. Sloth is one of the 7 homunculi, and he is physically enormous, a massive, slow-moving creature with a body built for heavy labor, which he has been performing without rest for decades. His defining quality, the one his name refers to, is not laziness in the traditional sense. He experiences everything as an overwhelming effort. Every movement, every thought, every action feels to him like an impossible burden. He digs because he has been told to dig, not because he wants to. He wants nothing except for everything, to stop requiring so much from him. He is the saddest of the homunculi in a particular way, a being of pure, exhausted endurance, doing tremendous work while wishing only that it was over. The soldiers at Briggs encounter Sloth in the tunnels and engage him. He is extraordinarily difficult to damage. He is fast in short bursts despite his size and his apparent heaviness. He regenerates, as all homunculi do, from wounds that would kill a human being immediately. The Briggs soldiers fight him with the same matter-of-fact professionalism they bring to everything, without panic, adapting their tactics as they discover what does and does not work against something that does not behave like any enemy they have trained for. This is happening at the same time as several other things, because the story at this point has grown complex enough that events in different locations are all moving forward simultaneously. And understanding Fort Briggs requires holding the Briggs thread alongside another thread that began in a completely different part of the country. The other thread is Ling Yao. Ling arrived in Amestris from Xing, the large country to the east, separated from Amestris by the desert that covers the ruins of Xerxes, sometime before the brothers reach Briggs. He is a prince. Xing operates on a system where the emperor has many wives, and therefore many children, and those children spend their lives competing for the right to succeed him. The emperor of Xing is old and dying, and the competition among his many sons and daughters for his throne is fierce and often fatal. Ling is the 12th prince. He came to Amestris with 2 bodyguards, his attendant Lan Fan, a young woman of extraordinary combat ability who is devoted to Ling with a seriousness that goes far beyond professional duty, and her grandfather Fu, an older man of equal skill and the same absolute loyalty. Ling's plan was specific and practical. Find a philosopher's stone, bring it back to Xing, use it to secure his family's position, and earn the emperor's succession. A stone would represent a power so significant that it would end the competition among the royal children before it destroyed what remained of the imperial family. Ling and Edward met and fought almost immediately, as people in this story tend to do when they first encounter each other. They reached an uneasy agreement afterward and began moving in parallel. Not quite allies, not quite separate, circling each other with mutual wariness and occasional reluctant cooperation. Ling's ability to sense the presence of other souls made him genuinely useful. People who carry philosopher's stones, which are made of human souls, emit a specific energy that Ling could detect, an Eastern skill he had trained in since childhood. The event that changed everything for Ling happened in stages. The first stage was Lan Fan's sacrifice. During a chase sequence in which the homunculi were hunting both Ling and the Elric brothers, Lan Fan was badly wounded. To allow Ling to escape, she did something that only a person with a specific kind of devotion would do. She cut off her own arm and used it as a decoy, tying it to a dog and releasing it to mislead the enemy while she dragged herself to safety. She survived. She lost the arm permanently and would later receive an automail replacement, but in the immediate term, she was out of action for an extended period while she recovered. Ling felt this as a specific kind of failure. He had come to Amestris for the power of a philosopher's stone, and the person he was closest to had paid with her arm while he was still searching for it. The second stage was the encounter with Father. Through a sequence of events involving gluttony, a homunculus whose defining characteristic is an all-consuming appetite, both literal and operational, Edward, Ling, and the shapeshifter Envy ended up trapped inside Gluttony's body. Gluttony has a false gate inside him, a broken replica of the gate of truth that can absorb things but cannot process them. So anything pulled inside him exists in a dark and endless void of blood and the remnants of everything Gluttony has ever consumed. They fought their way out through a transmutation that brought them directly into Father's lair beneath Central City. Father looked at Ling. Father, who had spent centuries reading people and calculating how to use them, saw in the Shingi's prince something useful. A young man whose desire for power was genuine and large, and whose body was strong enough to potentially survive what the homunculi's original human hosts had survived. He decided to use Ling as the vessel for a recreated Greed. The original Greed, the first one, who had run away from Father generations ago and set up an independent operation with a group of Chimera companions before being captured and destroyed by Bradley, had been reabsorbed by Father. His essence still existed within Father's body. Father extracted it and offered it to Ling. What happened next is one of the most carefully considered moments in the entire series. Ling said yes. He said it knowing what he was agreeing to. He had watched Father disable Edward's alchemy with a gesture. He had watched the homunculi operate and understood that he was in a situation where refusing would simply mean dying without gaining anything. He had come to Amestris for a philosopher's stone, and there was one being offered to him, in the most terrible possible way, but being offered. He calculated the odds and the costs and the potential, and he said yes. The philosopher's stone that contained Greed's essence was pushed into Ling's body. The process was agonizing. During it, Ling and Greed met in the space inside Ling's own mind. A strange internal confrontation between the prince's consciousness and the homunculus being installed alongside it. Greed told Ling to hand over his body. Ling told Greed he needed Greed's power to achieve his goals. They reached a rough arrangement. Not friendly, not trusting, but functional. Both of them would share the body. Both of them had things the other needed. When the process finished, the person who stood up looked like Ling, but with different eyes. Purple-irised, slit-pupiled, with Greed's particular swagger inhabiting Ling's posture and Ling's face. Greed had no memory of his previous life, because Father had wiped it before reinserting his essence. He was loyal to Father, initially, because he had nothing else to orient around. But Ling was still in there. This is the thing that made the Ling-Greed combination so different from anything Father had planned for. Ling did not disappear when Greed took control. He remained present, aware, watching from inside, occasionally surfacing when Edward called for him. He sent a message to Lan Fan through Greed's body, written in a Shingi's script that Greed did not recognize, telling her he was alive and had achieved what he came for. He stayed inside the arrangement he had made and endured it with the patience of someone who had thought several moves ahead before agreeing to the first move. At Briggs, all of these threads were beginning to converge. Olivier Armstrong was managing a fortress that sat directly on top of one of the plan's key infrastructure points. The Elric brothers were carrying knowledge that was slowly completing the picture. Ling was trapped inside his own body, while a homunculus wore his face and served the enemy. And somewhere beneath Central City, Father was approaching the final preparations for the event that the entire preceding 4 centuries had been building toward. The promised day had a date. A solar eclipse was coming, the specific astronomical event required to complete the array. Everyone who knew what was coming was moving toward it, on both sides, with the particular focus of people who understand that everything will be decided soon, and that whatever they are going to do needs to be done before that day arrives. Greed's memories began returning, slowly, as he operated inside Ling's body. The original Greed's experiences, his companions at the Devil's Nest, the people he had built a small community around before Bradley killed them, started surfacing as feelings that the new Greed could not account for. He killed one of those original companions, a chimera named Beto, who had survived and recognized him, and the act of doing it broke something open inside him. He could feel the grief of it, grief that was not supposed to be possible for a being whose memories had been wiped. Ling, watching from inside, told him plainly that things which become part of a soul cannot be washed clean, cannot be forgotten. They are there permanently, whether you want them or not. Greed defected from Father for the second time in his existence. He joined the side of the brothers, the side of the people trying to stop the promised day, not out of any noble motivation he would admit to, but out of the specific and honest truth of what he actually wanted, which was, as he eventually articulated it, not money or power or immortality, but people. His people. Something to belong to and something worth protecting. This is what his name had always actually meant under everything else. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. With Greed now moving alongside the brothers and Olivier Armstrong managing Briggs with her particular brand of absolute authority, the full picture of the trap is almost completely visible. And in the next part of the story, every scattered thread of the plan is finally named for exactly what it is, and the countdown to the promised day begins in earnest. Part 8. The Nationwide Transmutation Circle. There is a moment in this story where everything that has seemed separate reveals itself as connected. Not connected in the loose, general way that events in any long story eventually touch each other. Connected deliberately, architecturally, the way the beams of a building are connected, each one placed with specific intention, each one bearing a specific load, the whole structure only making sense when you step back far enough to see it entire. That moment arrives in the middle portion of the series, and when it arrives, the weight of it is considerable. Because what becomes clear is not just that there is a plan. What becomes clear is the scale of the plan, the age of it, the patience required to execute something that has been unfolding across 400 years, across generations of people who lived and died without any idea that their lives and deaths were being managed from the outside. Start with geography. Amestris is not a naturally shaped country. Most countries grow organically over centuries, borders shifting with wars and treaties, and the gradual movement of populations, edges that are jagged and irregular, and reflect the messy reality of how human communities actually expand and contract. Amestris does not look like that. Its borders are too clean, its shape is too deliberate. When you look at a map of Amestris and you know what to look for, the country's outline reads as a boundary drawn by someone with a specific purpose, rather than a border that formed through history. The purpose was to create a container. A transmutation array needs a defined space to function. The circle has to have edges, and everything within those edges participates in the transmutation, whether the participants know it or not. Father drew those edges across centuries, using the military expansion of Amestris. Every war, every annexation, every treaty that added territory to the country, to extend and refine the boundary of his array. The country grew in the directions it needed to grow. It stopped where it needed to stop. The entire national history of Amestrian expansion was, from the very beginning, the process of drawing a circle in land and people. Within that circle, specific points needed to be marked. In alchemical arrays, certain positions on the circle carry more weight than others. They are the load-bearing points, the places where energy concentrates, where the transmutation draws most heavily, where the preparation needs to be most thorough. In a nationwide array, these positions correspond to geographic locations, and at each of those locations, Father needed something specific to happen. He needed large-scale death. He needed the energy that comes from mass suffering and mass loss, concentrated at those precise points, burned into the land the way a brand burns into skin. This is why the wars happened where they happened. The Ishval Civil War was not in the southeast because Ishval happened to be in the southeast. Ishval was in the southeast because that location was a required point on the array, and the Ishvalan people happened to live there, and their lives and deaths were the material Father needed for that particular mark. The border conflicts in the north, the unrest in other regions, the manufactured tensions along multiple frontiers, each one positioned at a point the array required, each one producing the quantity and quality of death that the plan specified. When the Elric brothers and their allies mapped these events against each other, when Hawkeye's accounts of Ishval and Hohenheim's knowledge of Xerxes, and the geographical data that Hughes died gathering, all come together in the hands of people who understand what they are looking at, the picture that emerges is total and terrible. Every major conflict in living Amestrian memory, every place where soldiers died and civilians died, and the ground was soaked with enough suffering to leave a mark. All of it forming, when viewed from sufficient distance, a single coherent shape, a circle, drawn across an entire country, ready to be activated. The center point of the circle is Central City, the capital. the place where Father lives beneath the earth in his tunnels, where the military's highest command operates, where the final stage of the plan will be executed. Everything has been pointing here. Everything has always been pointing here. Father needs 5 human sacrifices to complete the process. This is a specific requirement, not a general one. The gate of truth, the vast space that exists beyond normal human experience, where truth resides and where all alchemic knowledge originates, can only be fully accessed through a very particular kind of human being. Someone who has attempted human transmutation and survived. Someone who has stood before the gate, had their toll taken, seen what lies beyond, and come back. These people have a connection to the gate that ordinary humans do not have. They have been through it. They carry its mark. Father needs to use these people as anchors, living points of connection to the gate, positioned within his array, through whom the energy of an entire nation's souls can be channeled toward the final opening. 5 sacrifices, each one a person who has crossed the line of human transmutation and returned, each one now carrying within them a door that Father intends to force open all at once. The 5 he identifies are Edward Elric, Alphonse Elric, Roy Mustang, Izumi Curtis, the woman who trained the Elric brothers and who, after the death of her baby, attempted human transmutation herself and lost several of her internal organs as the price. And Van Hohenheim, who did not attempt human transmutation voluntarily, but who passed through the gate during the destruction of Xerxes and carries its mark regardless. All 5 of them are known to Father before the brothers fully understand they are being tracked for this purpose. Father has been aware of them as useful pieces for some time. The plan does not require their consent. It requires only their presence at the right location at the right moment, which Father intends to arrange by force if necessary. The homunculi serve this management function throughout the middle portion of the story. They are not simply attacking the brothers and their allies at random. They are herding, moving pieces into position, allowing certain things to happen and preventing others, not out of any inability to act more aggressively, but because the plan requires specific people to be alive and in specific places when the promised day arrives. Killing Edward or Alphonse would be simple. Killing them is not what Father wants. Roy Mustang's position within this becomes clear through a sequence of events centered on his network of loyal officers. Mustang has spent years building a small, careful group of people within the military who know about his plans and support them. His officers, Hawkeye, Havoc, Breda, Fury, Fallman, each occupy positions that give him information or capability he would not otherwise have. He has been running what amounts to a parallel operation inside the military, working toward the moment when he will have enough rank and enough allies to move openly against the corruption at the top. Bradley is aware of this. Bradley has always been aware of it, and has allowed it to continue, because Mustang's existence and ambition serve the plan. A colonel working his way up through legitimate channels toward a position of power is not a threat to Father's timeline. He is a piece being moved into position. The day Bradley begins actively dismantling Mustang's network, separating his officers, reassigning them to distant postings, isolating him from his support structure, is the day the audience understands that the promised day is close. The pieces are being arranged for final use. Each of Mustang's officers is sent somewhere different. Hawkeye remains close. She is reassigned to serve directly under Bradley, which places her inside the Führer's office and gives Mustang a source of information from the very center of the enemy's position, but also places her in immediate danger and under constant surveillance. The others scatter across the country to postings that seem like normal military transfers and are something else entirely. Mustang understands what is happening. He is being managed. He responds by continuing to work, continuing to gather information, continuing to hold the network together through whatever means remain available, because his goal has not changed, and the fact that the enemy is paying attention to him means he is close enough to matter. The Elric brothers, during this period, are gathering their own pieces. The research Scar's brother left behind, the arrays tattooed on the arms that Scar now carries, turns out to contain something extraordinary. The older brother had worked out, before his death in Ishval, the fundamental structure of Father's nationwide array. He had understood what it was built to do, and had developed, through his combined study of Amestrian alchemy and Shingi's alkahestry, a countermeasure, a reverse array, something that could be activated at the right moment to interrupt Father's plan and restore alchemy to the people of Amestris after Father attempted to cut them off from it. The reverse array requires its own set of points across the country, Scar's Ishvalan allies, survivors of the massacre, people scattered across Amestris who have been living in the margins of society since the war, begin quietly positioning themselves at the required locations. They do this without announcing it, without drawing the military's attention, operating invisibly in the spaces that Amestrian society has always assigned to them. The people the plan used as fuel are now, without Father's knowledge, becoming the mechanism to stop it. Mei Chang contributes to this. Mei is a small girl from Xing, a minor princess from a small clan, sent to Amestris for the same reason Ling was sent, to find a philosopher's stone that could secure her family's future. She is young and earnest and capable of alchemy in ways that complement rather than replicate what the Amestrian characters can do. Alchemy draws on a different energy source than Amestrian alchemy. It works through the Earth's own energy lines rather than through the gate, which means it functions in situations where Amestrian alchemy does not. This distinction becomes critical on the promised day, when Father moves to cut every Amestrian alchemist off from the gate entirely. Mei's presence in the story, which begins as a somewhat separate thread, converges with the main group during the Briggs period and the period that follows it. Her knowledge of alchemy and her ability to perform it gives the allied group a capability that Father has not fully accounted for in his planning. He knows about alchemy in general. It came originally from Hohenheim's teaching, and Father is aware of its existence, but he has not given it sufficient weight in his calculations, and that underestimation will cost him. Hohenheim, during this same period, is completing his own preparation. He has been traveling Amestris for years, depositing fragments of his philosopher's stone, fragments of the individual souls of Xerxes, at points throughout the country. The process required him to spread himself thin, to place pieces of what he is into the ground at dozens of locations, trusting that those pieces would remain where he placed them and activate when he needed them to. This is an enormous act of will and an enormous act of faith, and he did it alone, without certainty that it would work. His counter-array is designed to respond to Father's activation of the nationwide circle. When Father triggers his transmutation and the souls of Amestris are pulled upward toward him, Hohenheim's counter will push those souls back, will use the Xerxes souls he has deposited throughout the country to redirect the energy, to hold the Amestrian souls in their bodies rather than allowing them to be consumed. It will not stop the promised day from happening. It will not prevent the moment of crisis. What it will do is change the outcome of that moment from a total victory for Father into a contest, one that the people on the ground will then need to win through their own efforts. He has told almost no one about this plan, not because he does not trust the people he has met, but because the plan's success depends on Father not knowing about it in advance. The fewer people who know, the less chance of the information reaching the wrong place. The picture that all of these separate preparations form, when assembled, is of a battle that is not primarily a physical one. Father's plan is alchemical at its core. It is about energy and souls and the structure of reality more than it is about soldiers and weapons. The response being assembled by the Allied group is also alchemical at its core. The physical fighting that will happen on the promised day is real and consequential, and people will die in it. But the true contest will happen at a level beneath the fighting, in the invisible structure of what alchemy actually is and how it flows, and who has the right to use it and toward what end. Central City is where it will all converge. The tunnels beneath it are complete. Sloth finished his decades of digging, though the effort killed him in the end, his massive body finally giving out under the combined assault of the Briggs soldiers and the accumulated exhaustion of a creature who had been performing brutal labor for longer than any human life lasts. The circle is complete. The sacrifices are identified. The date is fixed by astronomy. The solar eclipse is coming. The precise alignment of sun and moon and earth that the array requires to function at full capacity. The promised day is a specific date in the spring of 1915. Everyone who knows what it means is moving toward it. On Father's side, the homunculi managing their positions, the military command operating as instructed, the physical and alchemic infrastructure in place and ready. On the other side, two brothers who started this with nothing and have spent years building toward a moment they did not know was coming. A flame alchemist who has been climbing toward power he intends to use against the very system that gave it to him. A general from a frozen fortress who has decided this is her fight now. A prince sharing his body with a piece of something ancient and strange. An Ishvalan survivor carrying his dead brother's work in his skin. A girl from a distant country whose tradition of alchemy operates outside Father's control. And an ancient man who has spent centuries being guilty about what happened in a dead kingdom and has finally found the thing he can do about it. None of them are ready. All of them are going anyway. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The solar eclipse arrives and the promised day begins, and everything that has been building across the entire story, every sacrifice, every preparation, every quiet act of loyalty and defiance, is spent in a single day that will determine whether the nation of Amestris survives or becomes the second Xerxes. Part 9. The Promised Day. The eclipse begins quietly. The sun does not disappear all at once. It goes slowly, the moon sliding across it in increments, the light changing from full daylight to something dimmer and strange, the particular flat gray of a world where the sun is present but not quite itself. Shadows go soft. Colors drain slightly. The air feels different during an eclipse, cooler and more still, as though the world is holding its breath. In Central City, on this specific eclipse in the spring of 1915, the world is about to exhale everything it has. The fighting begins before the eclipse is complete. Olivier Armstrong moves her Briggs soldiers into Central City under the cover of a planned military ceremony, concealing combat-ready troops inside what looks like a formal procession. She has been inside Central Command for weeks at this point, inserted into the political structure of the capital through a series of careful maneuvers, gathering intelligence and positioning forces, and waiting for the signal that today is the day. When the signal comes, she does not hesitate. The Briggs soldiers are not people who hesitate. Mustang moves his network simultaneously. His officers, scattered across the city in their reassigned positions, converge on their designated targets. Hawkeye, who has been operating from inside Bradley's office, moves the moment she is able to. The coordination required to make all of this happen at once, across a city the size of Central, without any single piece of it collapsing the whole operation through early detection, is the product of months of quiet planning. It is not perfect. Nothing on this scale is ever perfect, but it holds well enough. Edward and Alphonse enter the tunnels beneath Central City. Below the city, in the space Father has built across decades of Sloth's labor, the underground chamber where Father operates is vast and dark and carved from the earth like a cathedral that faces downward instead of up. This is where the array's central point sits. This is where Father intends to stand when the eclipse reaches totality and the transmutation activates. The brothers are not alone going in. Greed is with them, Ling's body carrying Greed's essence, the two of them still sharing the same space in the same uneasy arrangement they have maintained since the night Ling said yes. Mei Chang is with them, her alkahestry available in situations where Father's interference with the gate might shut down every other option. Others move through the tunnels and the streets above, each carrying a specific role in a plan that has too many variables to fully control, and that everyone involved understands will require improvisation. Pride is the first major obstacle. Pride, the oldest homunculus hidden inside the body of the small boy Salim Bradley, has been operating in the tunnels as a guardian. His true form is not the child's body. His true form is shadow, vast, reaching tendrils of darkness that spread across any surface where light does not reach, each tendril tipped with eyes and mouths, capable of cutting and grabbing and crushing. In the darkness of the underground tunnels, Pride is nearly without limit. He can extend across enormous distances. He can see through any of his many eyes simultaneously. He has been alive longer than anyone in the story except Father and Hohenheim, and he operates with the cold patience of something that has outlasted every opponent it has ever faced. He captures Alphonse. He uses Alphonse's armor body as a container, pulling his shadow form inside the hollow iron shell and using it as a vessel from which to operate. Alphonse is still present inside his own armor, still conscious, still himself, but Pride is also there, riding him, using him, turning the suit of armor that contains Alphonse's soul into a puppet. The resolution of this comes from an unexpected direction. Hohenheim's counter-array activates. When Father triggers the nationwide transmutation at the moment of the eclipse, pulling the souls of every person in Amestris upward, out of their bodies, drawing them toward the central point to power his attempt to absorb the truth, Hohenheim's preparation responds. The fragments of Xerxes' souls he has deposited across the country for years activate simultaneously, pushing back against the extraction, guiding the Amestrian souls back into their bodies, rather than allowing them to flow toward Father. The people of Amestris collapse briefly. They fall unconscious for a matter of seconds as the transmutation hits them, and then they return to themselves. Father does not get what he planned to get. He gets something. He gets enough to force the gate open and absorb the being that lives beyond it, the truth, the vast force that controls all alchemic knowledge. into his own body. He becomes, for a terrible and unstable interval, something that contains God. His body transforms. He becomes a version of himself that resembles a much younger Hohenheim, returning to the original form the two of them shared when they both emerged from the wreckage of Xerxes. He contains power that should be beyond any single being's capacity to hold, but he did not get the full weight of Amestrian souls he needed. Hohenheim's counter-array denied him the foundation his plan required. He is holding something enormous with a container that is not large enough, and the pressure of that is already working against him before the fighting on the ground has reached its conclusion. Scar activates his brother's reverse array. The tattoos on Scar's arms, his left arm carrying the deconstruction array, his right arm carrying the unfinished reconstruction work his brother never completed, have been modified across the course of the story by Scar himself, working through his brother's notes, finishing what his brother began. The reverse array, when activated, restores the flow of alchemy to Amestris that Father has been blocking. Every Amestrian alchemist who has been cut off from the gate gets their connection back. Mustang, above ground, gets his fire back. Edward, below ground, gets his alchemy back. Wrath dies during this period. King Bradley, Wrath, had been removed from Central earlier through a staged incident, placed on a train that was then destroyed. He survived because Wrath's capabilities are extraordinary, and his ability to read and react to physical situations faster than any normal human is one of the qualities Father built into him. He made his way back to Central on foot and arrived at the fortress gates during the height of the battle, engaging Greed and Scar and Fu, Lanfan's grandfather, who has fought his way into the battle to protect Ling. Fu attempts a suicide attack against Bradley, wrapping himself in explosives and throwing himself at the Führer to detonate at point-blank range. Bradley cuts through the detonators. He cuts through Fu. Fu dies. A Briggs soldier named Buccaneer, already fatally wounded, drives one of Bradley's own swords through Fu's body and into Bradley, wounding him for the first time. Greed continues the fight. The battle at the gate is brutal and close and deeply costly. Scar eventually faces Bradley alone and kills him. Wrath, blinded for a moment by light reflecting off a sword blade, loses the advantage his ultimate eye gives him. Scar destroys his arms. Bradley falls. His last words are not defiant. They are almost satisfied. A man who is built for conflict, who lived for it, dying in the middle of exactly what he was built to do. Below ground, the fight against Father is reaching its end. Hohenheim enters the chamber. Father overwhelms him, eventually encasing him in a massive burst of energy. Edward and the others press the attack from multiple directions, each of them pushing against a being that is holding too much power for its body to contain. Father is beginning to lose control of what he has absorbed. The souls of the people of Xerxes, the ones Father took to build himself and his power 500 years ago, are pressing against the inside of his container, pushing outward, refusing to be held any longer. Greed makes his last choice. Father grabs Greed, pulling him close, trying to reabsorb the Philosopher's Stone that Greed carries in Ling's body. As Father begins extracting the stone from Ling's body, Greed uses the last moment of his control to do one final thing. He converts Father's body, not into its hardest form as his ultimate shield normally works, but into graphite, the softest and most brittle form of carbon. He makes Father's body weak on purpose. He spends his last action making the enemy vulnerable for someone else to finish. Then Greed is gone, extracted by Father. What remains is Ling, returned fully to his own body, standing in the underground chamber with everything Greed was now absent from the space he had occupied. Edward attacks Father with both arms. Alphonse, earlier in the battle, had made a sacrifice. He had used the transmutation the brothers performed on that original night in Rezembul, the one where Edward gave his arm to bind Alphonse's soul to the armor, and reversed it. He sacrificed his own soul to restore Edward's right arm, not the automail, the original arm, the one Edward lost at the gate at 10 years old. Alphonse collapsed as a result, his soul separated from his armor body, existing in the formless space near the gate. Edward punched through Father's weakened chest with both arms. The souls of Xerxes escaped through the gap. Father, emptied of the power he had stolen, was dragged backward through the gate by the truth he had tried to contain. The truth told him he would be returned to where he came from. Father, who had spent his entire existence trying to escape limitation, was enclosed completely and permanently. He disappeared. Edward stood in the chamber with his brother's empty armor beside him. He went to the gate one final time. He stood before the truth, and he made an offer. He would give up his ability to perform alchemy. Not his gate, not his arm, his ability to use alchemy at all, permanently, for the rest of his life. In exchange, he wanted Alphonse returned to his original body, his real body. The 10-year-old body that had been taken on the night of the transmutation in Rezemboul, preserved on the other side of the gate for 5 years while Alphonse's soul lived in armor. The truth accepted. Edward lost alchemy. Alphonse came back, thin, weak, barely able to stand, but himself. Entirely himself. In his own body, with his own hands, able to feel the ground under his feet for the first time in 5 years. They held each other in the wreckage of the underground chamber while the battle above them wound down. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. What comes after the promised day is quieter than everything that preceded it, and the quiet is the point. Each person who survived carries what they survived into a future that is finally, genuinely open. And the way each of them steps into that future says everything about who they became. Part 10. What comes after? The morning after the promised day is very still. Central City is damaged in the way that cities are damaged when fighting moves through their streets. Broken stone, burned buildings. The particular quiet that follows violence when the violence has finally stopped. Soldiers are still. People who were unconscious during the transmutation are waking up, confused, finding themselves on the ground in the middle of whatever they were doing the moment the eclipse hit, with no memory of the seconds they were absent from their own bodies. The people who were in the middle of it know what happened. Everyone else will spend a long time trying to understand. Healing takes time, so does everything that follows. The first death that comes after the battle is not a violent one. Then Hohenheim walks to Rezemboul. He makes the journey alone, the way he has made most of his significant journeys, quietly, without announcing himself, without asking anyone to come with him. He walks through the countryside that he has known for longer than most nations have existed, past the hills and the river, and the familiar shape of the land around the town where he chose to build what little domestic life he ever managed to build. He goes to Trisha's grave. He sits down in front of it in the grass, and he talks to her. The series does not show this as a dramatic scene. There is no swelling sound underneath it, no rain, no particular staging designed to wring feeling from the audience. He simply sits in the morning light in front of his wife's grave, and he speaks to her. And at some point during that conversation, he closes his eyes. He dies there, sitting in the grass in front of her grave, in the town he came back to too late and left too soon, in the quiet of an ordinary morning. His body has been held together for 500 years by the souls of the people of Xerxes, the hundreds of thousands of individuals whose lives were taken on the night the dwarf in the flask unmade the kingdom. Over the course of his time fighting Father and the Promised Day, those souls were spent. He gave pieces of himself away across Amestris for years, depositing Xerxes' souls at the points of his counter-array, and the battle consumed what remained. He ran out, and when the last soul departed, there was nothing left to maintain a body that should have stopped 5 centuries ago, and he simply stopped. He is smiling. The series shows this plainly and without comment. He died in front of his wife's grave, at the end of a 500-year existence defined by guilt and exile and the slow, patient work of trying to undo what he had failed to prevent. He made it to the end of that work. He got to finish it. He sits in the grass with a small smile on his face and the morning light on him, and that is how Edward and Alphonse find him when they come home to Rezemboul. They bury him next to Trisha. Edward is 17 years old. He has no alchemy. He has his right arm back. The original one, flesh and blood, returned by the gate in exchange for his ability to perform transmutation. But his left leg, which he lost at 10 years old and replaced with automail, stays automail. The gate returned what it specifically took from him at the moment of the original human transmutation. His leg had been given up voluntarily in the second transmutation, when he bound Alphonse to the armor. That was a different exchange, and the gate treats it as such. He keeps the automail leg. He does not seem to mind. Alphonse is 15 years old, and he is in his original body for the first time in 5 years. The body that came back through the gate is the body that was taken, the 10-year-old body, preserved on the other side, while Alphonse's consciousness lived in iron. 5 years passed on one side of the gate and not on the other. Alphonse returned thin and weak and barely able to stand, and he spends a significant period of recovery simply rebuilding the physical strength that a body needs when it has not been used. He is patient about this in the way that Alphonse has always been patient. He does not complain about it. He is grateful for it, for the weight of his own limbs, for the sensation of cold and warmth, for the ability to eat and sleep and feel tired and feel hungry. These are things he went without for 5 years. A body that needs recovery is still a body. and having one is something he does not take for granted. Roy Mustang is blind. During the final hours of the promised day, Father had forced Mustang into a human transmutation, threatening Hawkeye's life to compel him to open his own gate, to become the fifth sacrifice the plan required. Mustang did it to save Hawkeye. The toll taken by the gate for that transmutation was his eyesight. He came out of it unable to see, and the blindness is total. Mei Chang heals him. Her alkahestry, the Eastern tradition of healing that works through the body's own energy rather than through external transmutation, is capable of things that Amestrian alchemy is not. She restores his sight in the aftermath of the battle, using her particular skills to repair what the gate took. Mustang gets his eyes back. He gets his promise back too. The promise he made to himself after Ishval. The promise that gave shape to every career decision, every careful move up the military ranks, every sacrifice of normal life in service of the long plan, is still alive and now, for the first time, actually within reach. The corrupt leadership at the top of Amestris has been dismantled. The homunculi are gone. Bradley is dead. The people who were managing the country as a tool of Father's centuries-long scheme are either dead or exposed. Mustang states plainly, in the aftermath, that his goal is still what it was. He wants to become Führer. He wants to transform Amestris into a country with a real government. One where the military answers to civilian leadership, where decisions about war are not made by a single, unaccountable figure at the top of a command structure, where something like Ishval cannot be ordered into existence again without the mechanisms that stop it. He wants reparations made to the Ishvalan people. He wants them to be able to return to their land and rebuild what was taken from them. He will spend years working toward this. The story does not show the completion of it. It shows the direction. Mustang heading back into the work, Hawkeye beside him as she has always been, both of them carrying Ishval forward as the reason rather than as dead weight. Scar goes back to Ishval. His role in the final battle was decisive. The reverse array that his brother designed and that Scar spent years learning to complete was the mechanism that restored alchemy to the Amestrian alchemists at the critical moment. Without it, Father's blocking of the gate would have left the allied group fighting with their hands alone against something that had absorbed God. Scar's brother's work, carried in Scar's skin, finished the fight in the way his brother always intended, not through destruction, but through restoration. Scar himself is still Scar. He has not become a different person. He does not emerge from the promised day cleansed of what he was or who he chose to be. He killed people. He killed state alchemists who had participated in the massacre of his people, and he killed the Rockbells who had not. He carries all of this. He goes back to Ishval because it needs people to go back to it. The land is still there. The buildings are still gone, but the land remains. And the Ishvalan survivors scattered across Amestris need a place to return to and people willing to begin the work of returning. He does not go back as a monk reclaiming his original faith. He goes back as Scar, the person the war made, who has decided that the next thing the war has to produce is something that can be built rather than destroyed. Ling goes home to Xing. He returns to his country with what he came for, not a philosopher's stone, which is what he set out to find, but the knowledge of immortality that the stone represented. The experience of sharing his body with greed, of carrying a philosopher's stone inside himself for an extended period, and surviving the exit of it, gave him direct and personal knowledge of what immortality actually is, and what it costs, and what it does to a being who carries it. This knowledge is what his emperor needed. It is more useful, arguably, than the stone would have been. He ascends to the throne. The story confirms this in its closing pages and frames, showing a grown Ling in the robes of leadership, having achieved through an entirely unexpected path the goal he crossed a desert for. Lanfan stays with him. Of course she does. Winry is in Rezembul. She has been in Rezembul through most of the final arc, continuing her work, building and repairing automail, running the workshop she grew up in, being the person at the center of a place that the brothers keep returning to. She is good at what she does in a way that has always been clear and has never needed the story to announce it. She builds things that let broken people move through the world again. She has been doing this since she was a child watching her grandmother work, and she will keep doing it. Edward comes back to Rezembul. He comes back on a train, the way most significant arrivals in this story happen on trains, and he walks through the town and finds Winry. He has been working out what to say for some time. He is not a person who finds certain kinds of words easy, and the words he wants to say to Winry fall into the category of things he has circled around for years without landing on directly. He offers her, in his characteristically roundabout way, An equivalent exchange. He says he will give her half of his life if she gives him half of hers. It is an alchemist's way of proposing, framed in the language of the law that has governed everything he has ever done, applied to the one thing he wants that has nothing to do with alchemy. Winry tells him she will give him all of it, not half. They have 2 children, a son and a daughter. The story shows this in the final images, a photograph of the family together, the same warmth and chaos that the photographs of Hughes and his family carried, but belonging now to the 2 people who started this in a burned house on a hill in Rezembool. Alphonse, recovered and strong, sets out east. He wants to learn alchemy. He wants to travel to Xing and study with the people there, to understand the tradition that Mei Chang used to heal Mustang and that operated outside Father's control throughout the whole fight. He wants to bring that knowledge back. He wants to keep learning, keep moving, keep building the understanding of the world that he and his brother started reaching for when they were 9 and 10 years old, and believed that understanding enough would let them fix anything. The last image of Edward is him on a train platform, leaving. He does not look back. He has somewhere to go. The story ends the way it began, with movement. With 2 brothers heading in different directions, carrying everything they went through, alive and whole and free. The law of equivalent exchange, in the end, held. They gave everything. They got everything back. Not the same things they started with. Something better. Something earned. And that is the entire story of Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. From a winter night in Rezembool where 2 boys made one terrible mistake, all the way to a train platform where one of them walks forward into a life that finally belongs entirely to him. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.